We've done a little bit of work on Habakkuk in terms of application when we did our looking at creativity and a creative paraphrase. But so we'll run over a little bit of the same ground, but then we'll extend it a little bit further than we did there. If we want to review our big idea from the passage in terms of the language of the passage for the book of Habakkuk, we come up with something like this. The proper response to the coming Babylonian invasion is to trust God, who will deliver his people after a time of judgment that he has determined for them. All right? The proper response to the coming Babylonian invasion is to trust God, who will deliver his people after the time of judgment he's determined for them. So again, if we're going to bring it down to today, we probably want to deal primarily with this subject: how does faith respond to serious problems? When we did the creative paraphrase, we didn't spend much time on the theology of the passage. I want to do that here. And what is the vision of God, or the picture of God that's coming out of this book? Well, God is the great warrior king, seated on his throne, ruling the entire world. God is a great warrior king who acts on behalf of his people. Now, he could rescue them from the upcoming invasion anytime that he wants, but he has other concerns as well as just the peace and safety of his people. He also wants to vindicate his holiness when his people sin. So there's this issue not only of his people's protection, but also his people's holiness, and he wants to deal with that. Now, God also, in this picture of God, God is the one who is able to deliver his people when they respond to him in faith. Okay, so that's the vision of God. The picture of depraved, sinful man, then, is something like that human beings often turn to human solutions in the face of their troubles. Human beings often turn to human solutions in the face of their troubles. And effectively, we could say this is unbelief. Whereas the proper relationship between God and man is that man should respond to his problems, to her problems, by faith. And I think that's a pretty accurate summary of what the book of Habakkuk is getting at. Now, if we wanted to go the next step from the theology and identify a general statement of truth for application, or in other words, a principle, we could come up with something like this. When problems come into our lives, the reality is that God is still on the throne. When problems come into our lives, the reality is that God is still on the throne. Okay, well, we'll make that our principle. We could come up with others, and you could do that on your own. You could come up with other principles that express the teaching and the message of Habakkuk. But let's see if we can come up again with one or two smart applications to this principle. Again, smart application. S is stretching, M is measurable, A is attainable or achievable, R is relevant, T is time related. So let's see what we can come up with from that principle. When problems come into our lives, the reality is that God is still on the throne. Okay, how could we make that real in our lives in some way? Well, one thing I thought of is I will write out a daily prayer that I will pray each day that reminds me that God is still on the throne, and I'll use that prayer every day. Okay, so take the time, write out a 3 to 5 line prayer that expresses that truth, that God is still on the throne, to remind myself of that every day. It could be for a week, could be whenever I find myself in a particular difficult situation or something I'm dealing with, but I'll pull out that prayer and I'll use it. That one idea that you could use. A second smart application, and this is an application you could use for a variety of principles or a variety of passages, is I'm going to memorize a passage of Scripture. So I'm going to memorize Habakkuk 3, verses 17 and 18 over the next week. Two smart, I think, applications of that principle. When problems come into our lives, the reality is that God is still on the throne.